Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. The first meeting of the Board of Peace in Washington came to an end with billions of dollars pledged to rebuild a war-stricken Gaza. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first let's take a look at tonight's headlines.
We need to negotiate a peace agreement and stop this war. I think President Trump is correct on that. But now I think most of the cards are actually with Ukraine.
That's according to Finnish President Alexander Stubb, who sat down with TVP World to talk about the war in Ukraine.
Everyone still in Iran should immediately leave, and under no circumstances should you travel to that country.
This warning from the Polish Prime Minister comes as TVP World obtained footage of Iranian forces opening fire on mourners at a funeral this week.
One of the core principles in our system is that everybody is equal under the law and nobody is above the law.
Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, a former British prince, arrested after allegedly sharing classified information with the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Thursday marked the first meeting of Donald Trump's Board of Peace. In total, $17 billion were pledged to rebuild Gaza, and 5 countries have promised to send police forces. Paweł Trzaskowski has the details.
This building in Washington has recently been renamed the Trump Institute of Peace, and this is where the first session of the US President's Board of Peace was held. The board's primary goal is set to help oversee peace implementation in Gaza. And today, during its inaugural meeting, the first financial aid to the territory was announced.
Good music. Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, UAE, Morocco, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Uzbekistan, and Kuwait have all contributed more than $7 billion toward the relief package. That's great. Thank you, fellas. Thank you.
On top of that, the US pledged to chip in additional $10 billion, and 5 Board of Peace countries have already promised to send their troops that will form international security forces in Gaza: Indonesia, Morocco, Kazakhstan, Kosovo and Albania.
There is no plan B for Gaza. Plan B is going back to war. No one here wants that.
The event hosted the leaders of the majority of the founding member countries, 26 in total. But apart from the member states' representatives, there was also a handful of observer guests, mostly from Europe, Poland included.
I think Europeans are walking a fine line here. I mean, to not be outside of this entity that's created here.
The reasons behind Europe's hesitancy are numerous and include a $1 billion permanent membership fee, Donald Trump's lifetime chairmanship of the board, and its potential competition with the United Nations. That's why last week the Polish government announced the country says no to the board, at least for now.
Poland will not join the work of the Board of Peace, but we will analyze it.
We are going.
This move seems at odds with the Polish president's stance on the matter. Karol Nawrocki previously expressed interest in joining, but did not attend today's meeting in Washington himself. Instead, Poland, as an observer, was represented by his senior aide, Marcin Przydacz, a move that many in Warsaw hope will allow Poland to have the cake and eat it too.
Thank you very much.
Paweł Trzaskowski, TVP World.
After trilateral talks between Ukraine, Russia and the US in Geneva brought little results, Volodymyr Zelenskyy has expressed anger on social media. The Ukrainian president also called for greater European involvement in the ongoing talks. And so we go now live to our correspondent, Don Alert in Kyiv. Good evening, Don. Will Europe get a seat at the negotiating table?
Good evening, Maciej. Well, we know after the Munich Security Conference that some of the Europeans definitely want a seat at that table. And now, after you mentioned this tirade that President Zelenskyy went on social media, on X, posting 3 very long posts earlier this morning, well, we can also read between the lines in what he said, literally, and say that Ukraine is definitely moving in that direction. Now, let's talk about this. What progress was made in Geneva and what progress was not made? made. Now, and what made Volodymyr Zelenskyy so frustrated? Well, on the military front, you had trilateral talks, which involves the United States essentially playing a role in the monitoring of any potential ceasefire that may result in these peace negotiations. And President Zelenskyy said in these posts on X that on that front, they're all very, very close. It's the political front where they're very far apart. Now, if you recall, it was Vladimir Medinsky, what many experts call a pseudo-historian, who was reappointed to the delegation, the Russian delegation, to lead these talks in Geneva. And of course, a tactic of buying time and stalling is what pretty much has caused so much frustration by Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Now, let's just take a look at this post, or at least a part of a post that he put out earlier this morning.
I don't need historical shit to end this war and move to diplomacy, because it's just a delay tactic. I read no less history books than Putin, and I learned a lot. I know more about his country than he knows about Ukraine. But there is security. There is a big war waged against us. This is our lives. The only thing that I want to speak about with him is that I think that we need to resolve it in the most successful way.
Now, Volodymyr Zelenskyy also thanked his partners in the Middle East who have facilitated these previous rounds of talks, but he said it's a place in Europe that these talks need to be taking place. I mean, need I remind you that this is the biggest war on the European continent since World War II. The Europeans are involved to quite an extent as this is taking place on the continent, and they will be involved in Ukraine's future. Therefore, Volodymyr Zelenskyy said that they should be involved in this process, and maybe the Europeans could help the stall tactics, that Mr. Medinsky is taking there in Geneva. Now, TVP World's Adam Yasser went to Helsinki, Finland to speak with the Finnish president. And, well, he has a different take on where exactly Russia stands right now, and it's not a position of power.
Well, because we need to negotiate a peace agreement and stop this war. I think President Trump is correct on that. But now I think most of the cards are actually with Ukraine. Look, this war has been a strategic failure for Putin. He wanted to make Ukraine Russian, it became European. He wanted to stop NATO from enlarging. He got Finland and Sweden. And he wanted to keep European defense expenditure down. We're going up to 5%. Militarily, he's losing on the battlefront. He's not advancing. And when he advances, Ukraine advances somewhere else. So this has been a military disaster for Russia. And thirdly, his economy is doing badly.
All good points made by the Finnish president, Alexander Stubb. And of course, if we look back at the report from the end of January by the CSIS, and that report said Russia has incurred, since the full-scale invasion, 1.2 million casualties on the battlefield. Now, 850,000 of them were in just the past 2 years. And that has given Russia only 1.5% of Ukrainian territory for 850,000 casualties on the battlefield. So obviously the toll is mounting for Russians. And, on the way here to Kyiv, we were able to sit down with the mayor of Lviv, Andriy Sadovy. And, well, he gave us, of course, his perspective, despite all these blackouts that you see, all the attacks on the infrastructure, the nation and the feeling and how they are responding to Russia's continued aggression.
1 month ago, Russia launched Oreshnik to Lviv. But a lot of people in shock in world. We continue our life. After siren, children go to school, students go to university, restaurant open, theater open. But last week, without electricity, a lot of our theaters activate diesel generator. And we continue our love. We love our life.
And finally today, Sweden announced its biggest military support package for Ukraine at $1.4 billion. This will fund not only military aid, but air defense to protect the skies over big cities like Kyiv here in the capital. Now back to you in the studio.
That was Don Arleth reporting from Kiev. Thank you very much, Don, and stay safe. And we'll have the whole interview with Alexander Stubb, President of Finland, right after this show. All Polish citizens should leave Iran immediately, says Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Is the American attack on the Islamic Republic imminent? And is Russia ready to join the potential military conflict? Kazimierz Wysiak has this report.
The United States has amassed so many troops near Iran that it's now ready for a potential attack. According to multiple US media outlets, the strike could take place as early as this weekend.
They must make a deal, or if that doesn't happen, I maybe can understand. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But bad things will happen if it doesn't.
As tensions are brewing, the Polish government is once again warning its citizens, get out while you still can.
Everyone still in Iran should immediately leave, and under no circumstances should you travel to that country. I don't want to scare anyone with any possible developments, but we all know what I'm talking about. The possibility of a heated conflict is very, very real.
Washington deployed a second aircraft carrier to the region last week, but the US now finds itself facing off with an old adversary. Russia has joined Iran in massive naval exercises.
Russia continues to develop relations with Iran, and in doing so, we call on our Iranian friends and all parties in the region to exercise restraint and prudence.
The three sides discussed a way forward in Geneva on Tuesday, but with no apparent breakthrough. All eyes are now on US President Donald Trump. Will he order a strike?
As we don't have access to classified intelligence or detailed strategic assessments, so providing a definite answer is difficult. It appears that Washington is deploying what international relations literature refers to as coercive diplomacy.
While the US leader considers his next move.
He's always thinking about what's in the best interest of the United States of America, of our military, of the American people.
Questions remain about the people of Iran. The Islamic Republic has maintained a full and later partial internet blackout since it began its brutal crackdown of mass protests in January. But bits of information do get through, thanks to Iranians living abroad.
I just talked with my family yesterday, and they told me that, like milk, like something so simple, it has been twice more expensive since last week. The prices are sky high.
This video, shared with us by Reyhane, shows people running away from what appears to be government forces opening fire on crowds of mourners at a public funeral on Tuesday.
Imagine you are mourning for your loved one, and instead of having respect, having quiet time, there are direct shooting to people who are in the funeral.
Estimates on the number of people killed by the regime since the protest in January vary between 5 to more than 30,000. As Muslims across the world celebrate the first day of Ramadan, many Iranians cling to the hope that the US will intervene soon. At this stage, they would welcome any catalyst of change. But will it come? For TVP World, Kazimierz Wysiak.
Hungary now, with most of the country's pollsters giving the opposition party TISA a clear lead against the ruling Fidesz ahead of the parliamentary election. Viktor Orban's party has decided to mobilize its voters with a fake video allegedly showing the execution of a Hungarian soldier. The message is clear: vote for us or you'll be dragged into war. Andrew Sweeney reports.
Anya, mikor jön haza?
AI-generated videos are becoming common in politics, but one published by Hungary's anti-EU Fidesz party, led by Prime Minister Viktor Orban, plunges new depths. It shows a young girl wondering where her father is, who's revealed to be at war. He's then executed on his knees by a man wearing a uniform reminiscent of Nazi Germany. Fidesz's message is clear: vote for the party and Viktor Orban on April 12th, or war will come to Hungary.
For me, it raises question whether this level of negativity would be attractive. I'm quite sure that it's an act of desperation.
Fidesz is lagging behind in the polls to the pro-EU TISA party and its leader, Peter Magyar, a former Fidesz minister who wants to restore relations with Brussels.
What Viktor Orban and his people have done now tramples on the most basic human and moral norms. Using children, executions, and fear-mongering. This is not politics, it is soulless manipulation. It is unforgivable and profoundly outrageous.
Fidesz has published other AI videos, claiming TISA will drag young Hungarians off the streets to war in Ukraine. The streets of Hungary's capital, Budapest, are covered in posters depicting Magyar as in Brussels' pocket and of Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy stealing from Hungarians.
The amount of billboard campaigns like Ursula von der Leyen and the leader of the opposition talking to each other, they put so much money in it, and the level of the message is so low.
This isn't the first time a pro-Russia ruling party has framed the general election as being a stark choice between war and peace. In the 2024 general election in Georgia, the pro-Russian Georgia Dream Party held on to power with that message. However, the same tactics failed in the 2025 Moldovan elections, which were won by the pro-European Party of Action and Solidarity.
In many countries, the war or the threat of the war spillover has been very effectively securitized by political forces. They've been tried to do in Moldova, because many Moldovans are afraid of the war and that Moldova can be dragged in the war. And the same is in Hungary.
The election campaign officially kicks off this weekend. It's likely to be fraught and volatile. The government is also accused of attempting to blackmail Magyar with a sex tape. For TVP World, Andrew Sweeney.
This is definitely not the birthday surprise the former British Prince Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor was hoping for. As he turned 66 on Thursday, King Charles's brother was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office, which could indicate he was sharing classified information with the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Aisha Bachi has the details.
Eine Bombe eingeschlagen im britischen Königspalast.
L'arresto dell'ex principe Andrea.
À Londres, séisme pour la monarchie britannique.
He was already stripped of his titles, and now he might be stripped of his freedom. This is King Charles's Sandringham estate in Norfolk, where former Prince Andrew was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office on his 66th birthday. It comes after Thames Valley Police said it was assessing a complaint over the alleged sharing of confidential material by the former prince with the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The king, who was not informed of the arrest in advance, said in a statement, "The law must take its course," and went on to make an appearance at the London Fashion Week. And British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, when asked about the former royal prior to his arrest, said,
"One of the core principles in our system is that everybody is equal under the law and nobody is above the law. And it is really important that that is applied across the board."
The arrest comes 3 weeks after the United States Department of Justice released over 3 million documents exposing Epstein's circle.
It's a terrible case which shows really disgusting, actually, actions of some of the top politicians and officials in administrations of many countries, by the way. And it seems that it's Europe, actually, that has taken, until now at least, that has taken the most serious steps to clean up the mess of the Epstein controversy and scandal.
Now European governments are sharpening their focus on the broader geopolitical ripple effects of the Epstein files. Poland was the first EU country to form a special task force in early February to investigate Epstein's ties to Russian and Belarusian intelligence.
We know that he's been on multiple occasions to Russia, and that's confirmed because of the travel lodges. So you can see that, yeah. But there is no confirmed travel scheme for him to arrive in Minsk, even though he had the visa multiple times, and that's what. Some people led to the suspicion that he was actually working with the Belarusian intelligence services and didn't want to leave any trace of that.
A new UN report says some conduct described in the Epstein files may meet the threshold of crimes against humanity. And as investigators sift through millions of pages, more powerful names could still surface. For TVP World, I'm Aisha Badja.
$17 billion pledged for rebuilding Gaza and policemen from 5 countries to monitor the situation on the ground. That's the outcome of the first meeting of Donald Trump's Board of Peace. And here to talk about the body's inaugural session is Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good evening.
Good evening.
So dozens of countries sent their representatives to Washington today. However, not all of them have decided whether they will join the project or not. So what future awaits the Board of Peace? Will it eventually transform into a body ready to replace the UN?
Well, you know, the UN, I think, has failed in many respects, and I do think that something has to happen. Whether Donald Trump can create his own organization that would replace the UN is highly questionable, obviously. The UN does a lot of good work, but, you know, the problem with the UN is the basic rules by which it was organized right after the Second World War. Take the case of Ukraine's war. You know, you have the countries that were principal in the Second World War sit on the Security Council with a veto that cannot be overcome. So, for instance, Russia has been a predator post-war all over the place, and they veto any peacekeeping or any intervention by UN officials in messing up their predations and their warfare. So, for instance, you know, the General Assembly of the UN said, you know, we think it's a war and peacekeepers should go. Russia vetoed it. China went along, and there's no getting rid of the veto members. So that is a rigidity that has actually paralyzed, I think, the United Nations as we know it. Now, what Trump is trying to do is he's trying to create his own peace monitoring or conflict resolution system. And of course, it's politicized because he's going to be the chairman for life and he's going to run it. So it's going to be his way or the highway. So it really isn't an alternative necessarily, but, you know, we'll see. And he's charging $1 billion to join it. And that's, you know, that's a pretty high price to pay. And he's starting with the Gaza problem.
But you need to pay it only after 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. Now, talking about alternatives, do you think it's smart for Europe, well, especially for Poland, which relies so heavily on American soldiers stationed on its eastern border, to remain undecided whether to accept Donald Trump's invitation to the Board of Peace?
Well, I think, frankly, you know, if he's asked your country to join and you are otherwise allied with it, I think it's an offer that really is difficult to refuse, frankly. Now, that's not to say that some haven't already. I think France, the British have turned it down. He offered it to Canada, where I live, and Canada, the Canadian Prime Minister made a very nasty speech about Trump at Davos, and the offer was rescinded. So we're not on it, even though we may have said we wanted to be on it. Look, it's a Trump deal. I hope it does some good. The Gaza thing sounds very interesting because, you know, nobody's done much there. And, you know, he's got $17 billion apparently to start the rebuild. He wants to put 5,000 troops there to keep the peace while the thing gets rebuilt. You know, these are good, you know, good solid ideas if they come to pass.
Right. Now, the countries you've mentioned, they are quite far away from the front lines of Ukraine. Well, Poland finds itself in a different position. Now, in this context, we've seen Viktor Orban there in Washington. Is Hungary now a more reliable partner for the US than Poland?
Oh dear. I don't think Hungary's a reliable partner for anybody. Hungary does exactly what its leader Orban wants to do. And he has defied the NATO, he has defied the European Union, he's defied everybody in those organizations by being pro-Russia, by being against Ukraine, by not helping Ukraine, by not even letting weaponry go through his country to help Ukraine if others supply it. I mean, he's just a menace, and he's also flouting the European Union's ban against Russian energy. He and Slovakia, I mean, they're two outliers, and they're a problem. And I think that at some point, NATO and the EU may have to boot them out. So, you know, it's a funny old world out there, and the power is no longer centralized around something like the United Nations. It seems to be centralized around the EU to a certain extent, and the United States and China.
Now, the presidents of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, the presidents of Armenia and Azerbaijan, they have all accepted Donald Trump's invitation and are now founding members of the board of peace. Now, these are all former Soviet countries, which Russia obviously sees as its own sphere of influence. Now, what does it tell us about the American ambitions in Central Asia and in the Caucasus region?
Well, I think that this is interesting, and that's what you're going to see, that we're going to end up with a tripolar world, China, Europe, and the United States. Russia's just an outlier. It's an outlaw country. And people will gather, countries will gather within these three alliances to protect their interests. I'm not sure China's going to attract a lot of people, but where you have an interesting situation developing now is that, you know, it looks like Trump is about to attack Iran. That's good news for Ukraine. Bad news for Russia. That's good news for Azerbaijan. And some of those areas in the Caucasus, which is maybe why they're flocking to his board of peace, because if he is going to take on the big problem in that region, which is Iran and its terrorist organizations, and about 20% of Iran's population are from Azerbaijan, former Soviet place. And there's worries about whether Russia will get militant toward former Caucasus and Central Asian republics. You're going to see a collection of countries that will, for their own reasons, swarm around helping Trump. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, he can't just run it like a dictatorship either. He may want to or think he can, but that's not necessarily the case. So if I'm Poland or I'm Canada, I'm going to think long and hard about this. You can't shun it because that's offensive to him. We all need support from our allies. And, you know, so it's a tricky, tricky diplomatic game.
Oh, a tricky diplomatic game. You mentioned Ukraine, and, well, no Palestinians have been invited to the board of peace. The future of Gaza will be decided without them. So if the board of peace indeed grows into a larger body, could it one day lead to a situation where Ukraine's future is decided without Ukraine?
Well, I don't think this board of peace is about picking and choosing winners. It's called a board of peace because I think that he's been frustrated, and I think the world has been, that the United Nations has been able to do very little, if anything, about the Ukrainian invasion, about all the other conflicts around the world. And, you know, they were supposed to be the policemen. Well, the problem is they're crippled by their own rules, where you have Russia sitting there sabotaging the United Nations and China because they have the permanent veto. So a workaround is necessary, and this is his attempt. I would say that the more strong nations like Poland and Britain agree to join it, not necessarily make him a lifelong chairman, although that's maybe part of the problem, but to get very much involved, I think you may see the creation of a new kind of United Nations peacekeeping situation arise, because the UN is, I think, all but finished in terms of being helpful and stopping conflicts around the world.
Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure as always.
You're welcome.
And that's all for now, but stay with us for On the Record with Adam Jassa, who sits down with the President of Finland, Alexander Stubb, to talk about the future of the war in Ukraine, relations with China, and being the so-called Trump whisperer. So thank you for watching and enjoy the interview.